This is just a quick tutorial of data types and variables in Dart. We're not going to go very far into it. We'll just talk about literal data types and some variables that you can declare and initialize. So first of all, if you haven't used this before, this is called DartPad. It's basically an in-browser IDE, and it's really well done. So if you need an environment to run Dart in, just get this running up real quick by just going to DartPad. You can type it in Google and oops, that's DartPad. Let me get the T in there. DartPad, here you go. It's the first thing that comes up, and they give you this little script, this little for loop that you can just click run and get your output over here. So we'll just start with this. And one really interesting thing to note right off the bat is that in Dart, every data type is an object. So the default type for everything is null. So we could say, for example, let's make an integer variable called my int, and we'll just say it's 42. And you can see that this editor is really nice because it gives me real-time comments on my code. I'm just going to print out this my int and run it, and we see, look, we get 42. Not a big surprise there, but what were to happen if I did not assign it to anything? You'd see that I get that default type of null, which might come as a bit of a surprise if your background is in Java, for example, where default types would be for a primitive like this int would be 0, but that's not the case in Dart. They're all objects, so default type is null. They basically just took some characteristic of JavaScript and push it even a little further, because in JavaScript everything is an array essentially. And so one thing you might have noticed right off the bat is that I have this int here. I'm not saying var, I'm not saying let, I'm not saying const. I have this int. So a little more like Java than JavaScript in that sense. But here's where it is also kind of like JavaScript. I can have my types inferred. So I could just say my inferred int, equals 42. This one will be 42. And then just print that out. Geez, there we go. And then you can see that that's prints out just fine, compiles, and if you hover over this, if I click this, you can see down here it tells me that, oh, it's an int, my inferred int. So it was just able to type that dynamically. So typing in a lot of cases is optional in Dart, which is pretty nice. So the other type of number, the only other type of number, is double. And so if you come from Java, you probably know that you have several different types. You have longs, you have shorts, you have chars, and in Dart you just have ints and you have doubles. And in JavaScript this would be like having a float or a just a regular number. So you would say double, my double equals 4.6. Oops. And if we just click on double, we see, oh, yep, that is in fact a double down there. And another interesting thing, well, okay, we'll do the corollary here. So you can also have that inferred too. So var my inferred, I'm just going to shorten this, my inferred double equals 4.4, and if I click over that, I see that that's also a double, and the only warnings I have are that I'm not using it. So if I just go down here and I say print my double, this is okay. So this is interesting. I can do that, no problem, right? I can print, but I can't just, it's not like console.log in JavaScript where I can just give it as many arguments as I want. You'll see right here, this error, too many positional arguments, one expected but two found. So if I want to print, I have to have some kind of workaround, and for now I'm just going to do this, to not complicate things too much. And I'm just going to paste that in there, run. You see those blue warnings go away, and we get what we would expect printed out. Another thing is you can also do exponents. So I could say my exponent equals 1.3 to the 20. So let's say 130. Just print that out. And there you go. Like what we expect. We have 1.3, and then we just move the decimal place over 1, and then one more, 2 times. So another thing, I guess the only other really important thing to know here is how doubles and ints interact. And there are a couple things here. The first one is that as of Dart 2.1, integer literals are automatically converted to doubles when necessary. So if you were to, for example, say, all right, let's say var automatically converted double equals, let's not take my int because it's null. Let's take my inferred int plus 4.4. So we should have 42 plus 4.44, we should get 46.4. And this should be of type double. And if we click on this, we'll see that it is. So similar to Java, where you have promotion to wider, broader, bigger types, Dart also promotes variables. So if it's an int, it'll become automatically promoted to a double. The only thing is in Dart, a double isn't a bigger type than an int. They're both 64-bit 64-bit numbers. They take up that much space in memory, and the difference is the double is a double precision floating point number, and the int is just your typical 64-bit number. So let's just print that and say, I'm just going to copy that over. Notice this error that'll come up, expected to find semicolons. Semicolons are required. Let me toggle that. Sorry, it's my flux protecting the eyes. So we get 46.4 right here, as we'd expect. So that's all well and good. That's pretty much it for numbers. Oh, okay, there's one more thing, and it's related to ints and doubles and conversions, and that is, so what if we want, the question is, how do we go from a double to an int? In Java, you might do something like that, where you cast. And there are a few ways to do this, but right now we're just going to talk about this because it's a little weird. Let's say int converted equals 8. Let's go with 8.9. And then remember how all primitives, everything's an object in Dart, including literals. Well, it means we could just run methods right on this. And if you look, you see there's actually quite a few methods you can run on this double. And one of them is round, and it gives back an int. So that's one way to do it. It compiles just fine. We click on this, we see, oh, that's an int. So that's one way to do it, is just to round. And rounding basically works like you'd expect. If you have 0.5, it's going to round up, and you get this nice little informational message here. And like that. Now, these are stylistic things. You might not actually want to do that as a means of style, but the important thing is to know is that even literals are actually objects, and so that they have attached methods. Okay, so now we just need to cover strings. And strings are interesting for a couple reasons. String interpolation is pretty nice, even a little bit nicer than JavaScript, which is pretty nice. But let's just give ourselves some space. Oh, and one more thing. Notice how I have single quotes here. Well, those are optional. So I could also have double quotes if I just did this. I'm just going to put some new lines in here, and both of these are equally valid. They don't have semantic meaning. Single quote is not, for example, a char like it would be in JavaScript. It's just another way to denote a string, very similar to JavaScript. Okay, so let's just make some strings. Let's have string 1, apple. Let's have string 2, S2 equals orange, and string S3 equals, let's say, Kirk's apple, and we have an apostrophe in there. And very similar to JavaScript, you would escape it if you were using singles. You would just escape it with a backslash, that apostrophe. There we go. Kirk's orange. Oh, boy. Okay. So we have our strings. Now, this is how you would do it in Dart. So let's just say S1, and we have S2. Notice this $sign is basically saying, okay, we have a variable. S3, and then if you're familiar with JavaScript, you might be familiar with something like this, and that still works here. That works in Dart just fine. But there is a convention that says don't use these brackets if you don't have to. So whereas in JavaScript, if you're using backticks and these brackets for string interpolation, you would have to use the brackets. Whereas here, if you have a single variable, you don't need to perform any operations on it. You don't need these. These are optional, and they're actively discouraged if you have a single variable. The exception is if I have, let's say I want to say S4 plus Kirk's orange is yummy, and I run this, I have that plus in there. It's not doing what I might expect it to do, because I have my variable here, but there's no logical connection to this. This is still just part of the string. I need a way to say, oh, this is logic that I want to run using this variable. And this is the case where you would just use a bracket, like you might be familiar with from JavaScript. And now this also needs to be a string. And so now we should see Kirk's orange is yummy and without that plus mark. So if we run that again, we'll see that is the case, and I just forgot to include a space, so I'll add that, and then we get what we want. So these brackets, that's just how you do string interpolation when you need to run additional logic. You don't just have a variable that you're trying to print out. So I think that is about it. That pretty much wraps it up for this. In the next section, we'll talk a little bit more about modifiers, specifically final and const, which tends to trip people up even if they've worked with them before. Const is something that JavaScript has. Final is something that Java has, but they're a little bit different in Dart. So that's what we'll talk about next. See you in the next video.